Hello and welcome to this review of my Leopold FC900R. This keyboard is a commercial donation from mykeyboard.eu, who also supplied the BKE Redux domes. Check the link in the description below for where to buy it. I requested it as an entrant in my planned Top X Most Silent Keyboard Switches video, which is still planned. It's just that PFU is being extremely uncooperative, so getting hold of a HHKB Type S is proving to be much harder than I'd hoped. Anyway, this one was recommended to me as an excellent chassis for Cherry's entrant, which are Cherry MX Silent Red, which we'll get to in a bit. You can get it with a variety of other Cherry MX switches, and you can order the keyboard in various color schemes as well, but for this one I went with a black one with red on black keycaps, which seems like a natural fit for the switches. Leopold has a reputation for making high-quality products, many of which use Cherry MX switches, which sounds like it would be a nice departure from Cherry's own MX-based keyboards, which generally feature build quality that's on par with wet cardboard. In addition, it doesn't have too many bells and whistles, including having no backlight except for the lock keys, as there is no lock light bank. Some people might lament the lack of RGB, but I actually like that they're not trying to rely on fluff like that to market their product. It's not a bad looking keyboard overall anyway. The styling is very conservative while having just a little bit of lipstick in the right places, so to speak. I like it, I think it looks good. So how does the build quality actually stack up? Well, at just under 1.2 kilos, it weighs a bit less than a Dell Bigfoot, and it uses a strong plastic case and a metal mounting plate. There's very little flex in the case as well. It feels extremely rigid and taut. I'll admit it's not quite the tank I was expecting based off of its reputation, but it's pretty okay. It comes with flip-out feet that have little rubber non-slip pads on them, which is a nice touch, and a detachable cable that can be routed through one of 3 cable gutters. Nice touches, again, definitely gives off a vibe of quality. The keycaps are double-shot PBT, red on black, and they're very thick at 1.5 millimeters. I think they might have been made by GMK, and they use a standard Cherry font, it seems, but the lettering is much smaller, and I have to admit that on this color scheme it's pretty difficult to see the lettering in the dark, and because it would come from below it, I don't think that backlighting would help alleviate this issue. Regardless, they're very nice, and they included some alternate keycaps for swapping the control and caps lock keys, which I know some people are very fond of, so that's some nice attention to detail. And this takes me to these 4 dip switches at the back, which allow the user to customize the board by indeed swapping control and caps lock, but also swap the Alt and Windows keys, which is probably meant for Mac users, or the Windows and FN key. The 4th one locks the Windows keys, also known as a gaming lock, which is extra useful on this particular board, but I'll come back to that in a bit. The switches are Cherry MX Silent Red, or Pink as they're sometimes known, because of the slightly different color of the slider compared to Cherry MX Red. They were developed originally for Corsair a few years ago in an effort to produce a quieter switch, and they were first featured in the Corsair Strafe keyboard. For a limited time, MX Silent switches were exclusive to Corsair products, but now they also appear on other products such as this one. The way it works is that the slider comes with several integrated pieces of rubber which are designed to absorb the impact of the keystroke, reducing the so-called clack, which is the sound that the slider makes when it impacts the switch housing. This is different from what's known as a click, which is an intentional noise created by the switch to provide auditory feedback to the user. Click and clack can be distinguished by 2 things. First of all, clack is produced by the slider, while a click is often produced by a different part than the slider. For example, in Cherry MX Blue it's a click jacket, in Alps SKCM it's a leaf spring, in Space Invaders it's a follower arm, and in Buckling Springs the coil spring does double duty as a clicker. Second, clack approaches inaudibility if the switch is pressed very slowly, while a clicker produces a lot of noise even under those conditions. The noise damping mechanism behind Cherry MX Silent is clearly based on that of Alps's dampened SKCM switches, which they produced in the 90s, although their approach was a little bit different. With the Alps design, 2 small figure-of-8 rubbers are held in the side of the slider. Compared to the integrated pieces of Cherry's design, this has the advantage that you can take them out and undampen the switches if you like. Other than that, in practice, they're very similar. Both Alps' and Cherry's design have a very useful trait. Because there are rubber pieces at both the top and bottom, they silence both the downstroke and the upstroke. Other dampening designs, such as O-rings, only silence the downstroke, leaving a noisy upstroke, and therefore they are much less effective. Besides, they tend to reduce the travel quite a lot and can feel quite mushy. To increase the level of dampening, Leopold also put a fiber mat in the chassis, which further helps with noise reduction. It's overall definitely one of the most silent boards I know. Ironically, although I have many keyboards with Cherry MX Red switches, I haven't been able to review any of them yet. They're basically very light linear switches, and the silent ones are pretty much the same, although the travel is slightly reduced from 4 to 3.7mm because of the dampeners. It's not that noticeable in the flesh really. Honestly, I think these are pretty decent. The damping mechanism is not too annoying, you know, on some designs it can be a bit mushy, but it's not that strong on this. It's better than I remember from trying them at meetups even. And I like light linear switches, so overall I'm not displeased with these. Interestingly, the slightly softer bottoming out feel that the dampers provide actually almost makes them feel as if they were tactile. I have a board with certain damp and tactile switches in this vein, and trying them out side by side, the difference isn't that huge, although the actual tactility in these is pretty weak, admittedly. One thing you might run into with Cherry MX Red, or also the silent ones, is that it's pretty easy to accidentally activate them with just the weight of your finger. It's not too bad, but especially if you're used to stiffer switches, it's something to keep in mind. This exacerbates the problem of the hard-to-see legends in low-level environments, which means that in the dark I make relatively frequent mistakes on this board. If you accidentally hit the side of a different switch, it'll likely get triggered too, which again doesn't help. In the light it's perfectly fine though, in fact I type relatively quickly on it. On a side note, the board technically features N-key rollover, but is limited by the USB protocol to any 6 key presses. Unlike some boards I've seen that have this, it doesn't overwrite old keys to make way for new keys though, it just blocks any beyond 6, which is probably the better way to do it. Prices hover around €120, which is in the medium budget range, and there's a fair few significantly different versions of this model. For this price range, you don't get a lot of extra features, bells or whistles, almost none in fact, but overall it's a decently performing board with a nice, simple styling and a focus on noise reduction. It's not ultra silent or anything, in fact the spacebar could do with some extra dampening, but I think for the vast majority of officers this should be quite acceptable. That's it for this review. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and following is a typing demonstration of me typing on this keyboard.